These are the notes for Chapter 18, which deals with the labor market in greater detail than we studied it before. So we're going to look at, right now, a perfectly competitive labor market. So we previously looked at a perfectly competitive product market. There are many buyers and sellers, no barriers to entry. Well, that's similar in the labor market. There are two groups who are in the labor market: the demanders of labor. In the labor market, demanders of labor are the businesses, and the suppliers of labors are the individuals or the households. So it's reversed from that of the product market. The price that's normally on the y-axis is going to be the price of labor, so we're going to call that the wage rate. And the quantity is going to be the quantity of labor or employment. In the product market, we looked at the firm being a price taker. This is going to be different. The wage rate is established by the interaction of the demanders and suppliers of labor, but that wage rate is going to be taken by the workers. So here we're going to have a wage taker. So the wage taker is actually the prospective employee. So therefore, the supply of labor curve, the side-by-side graphs, is going to be horizontal at the same level as the wage rate. And we are going to have the downward sloping demand for labor. And this would be the quantity that the firm is going to hire. Separate question. Firms, of course, can choose which inputs they're going to hire to make outputs to produce goods. They can choose machines or workers. So in this scenario that I made up, suppose you have an individual person who can produce 8 products in a day, or you could hire a machine, and that machine produces 15 products in a day. Do you have enough information to answer what the firm would hire? The answer to that is going to be no, because we don't know about the cost. If the machine costs maybe $150, then we can say the per unit cost is going to be $10 per unit. If maybe the worker was paid $120, they'd be producing $15 per good. So in this scenario, $10 is cheaper than $15, so presumably the business would want to hire the machine and not the worker. We could obviously reverse the numbers and have a different outcome. So here we're going to look at section 8.2, look at the demand for factor production. So we know the factors of production are the land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So now we're going to more specifically look at the input markets. So these are to produce the goods, and we know, as just said, the demand for labor comes from the businesses. The businesses demand the labor, and the supply of labor comes from the individuals or the households. So the demand for labor for the market, in the market, it is downward sloping. If the wage rate is higher, everything else equal, workers are the businesses are not going to be as happy to hire those workers. So if the wage rate increases, the quantity, right, it's a change in price, so it's the quantity demand for labor is going to decrease. If the wage rate was low, let's say $10 an hour, maybe willing to hire 100 employees. If the wage rate went up to 15, firms maybe only be willing to hire 60. So that'd be a decrease in the quantity of labor. Relates to the law of demand. We know from product market and the law of demand, when price went up, didn't the quantity demand for that good go down? It works similar in the labor market. If the price, in this case the wage rate goes up, the quantity demand for labor goes down, and that's a movement along the curve. The question becomes, so we looked at in a product market, what causes the demand curve to shift? Well, this is the demand curve for labor to shift. Well, as before, if there's an increase in demand, doesn't matter if a product or labor market, if there's an increase in demand, at each price, quantity would be greater. So if there's an increase in demand for labor, that would be a rightward shift as shown here. So what would cause the demand for labor to increase or decrease? There are two factors which are listed on the page which follows as well. But one is the selling price. If the selling price for the product is higher, now if business can make more money, then you figure they want to produce more of those products, and they're going to increase the demand for labor. This slide relates to the productivity of the worker. If workers are more productive, if their productivity increases, then the firms would also be willing to hire more workers because they'll be able to make more money as well. So along those lines, the demand for labor is said to be a derived demand. It's a derived demand because it comes from somewhere. Well, the demand for labor is derived from the demand for the product. If consumers want the product, therefore there's a greater demand for the product, and businesses consequently will have a greater demand for the workers who produce that product. So if the demand for some product increases, when demand increases, we know price is going to increase and the quantity is going to increase, and therefore if prices are higher and there's more goods are going to be produced, the demand for labor would increase. So once again, that's why it's considered a derived demand. It's derived from the demand for the product. A increase in the demand for the product results in a increase in the demand for labor of that product. If you think back to wooden tennis rackets, since wooden tennis rackets are no longer in demand, the demand for the workers of those wooden tennis rackets declined. So the price of the firm's product, as mentioned, is one of the factors that causes a change in demand, which is a shift in the demand curve. Another one deals with the marginal product of labor. So the marginal product, marginals always change. So the marginal product of labor is what's your change in output when you hire one more worker. So if you hire one more worker, say going from the fourth to the fifth worker, so that's a change in 1. If your output goes from 10 to 16, that's 6 more goods. So the marginal product of labor would be 6. That additional worker hired produced 6 more goods. If the marginal product of labor increases, we'll think if it's 6/1, or now let's say if we had one worker and it's 8, so 8 over 1. Well, if one worker produces 8 goods versus 6 goods, clearly the 8 would be better. So if the marginal product of labor increases, then workers are more productive, they're producing more goods. So business want to use more labor in this case, and that would cause an increase in the demand for labor. This is everything else equal. And if technology improves, and if workers become more productive with that technology, they can make more goods, that would also cause an increase in the demand for labor. So to review, the two factors that cause a shift in the demand curve are the price change of the firm's product. The higher the price, then the greater is the demand for the workers who produce that good. And also the greater the marginal product of labor, the labor demand is going to increase and the curve would shift rightward. What really has to be considered, and this is very important, whether or not firms should hire one more worker, it's not just the marginal product of labor. If they can produce 6 more goods, it's also what the selling price is. When you multiply the selling price times the marginal product of labor, you get a concept, and there are 2 terms for it. You get a concept called the value of the marginal product or the marginal revenue product. So if you think of the term marginal revenue, how much additional revenue is the company taking in when they hire one more worker? So let's just use an example. So that example I gave before, when the marginal product of labor was 6, if you hired some worker and that worker could produce 6 more goods, and suppose the selling price, let's say it's in a day, and if the selling price is $10, well, if that one additional worker can produce 6 more goods and the selling price is $10, then didn't that worker, by hiring him or her, didn't the firm bring in $60 additional dollars? Therefore, their marginal revenue product has increased by 60. That's the same as saying the value of the marginal product is 60. And then a firm would hire or not hire a worker depending upon what you're paying them. As we'll see, the presumption is if it's more than 60 or less than 60, the firm would or would not want to hire that worker. So here's an example. So once again, the marginal product of labor is different than the value of the marginal product or the marginal revenue product. Both of those are the product of the marginal product of labor times the selling price. Just to review what was just said. So in this example, assume that the price of a car wash is $3. So I think it's a very cheap car wash, and the price is $3 to get your car washed. So that would be the selling price. Well, based upon the table below, where we have the quantity of labor and the total product, from that we want to compute the marginal product of labor. So this is the MPL column. And separate from that, we want to compute the value of the marginal product, which is the same as the marginal revenue product. And both of them are the formula above. So just making this a little bit larger. So the marginal product of labor. So if I hire one more worker, I can produce 5 more goods. So it's 5 divided by 1 is going to be 5. And we can plot this at the midpoint as discussed before, or at 1. So you hire one more worker. The book usually graphically puts it 0.5. So either that 0.5 worker goes to 5, or you could say that first worker, when you hire them, is 5. Probably makes more sense to put at 1 to 5, but I'm going to be consistent and use the midpoint. If you hired the second worker, they produce 4 additional goods, so the marginal product of labor is going to be 4. And if we keep going, so that would be plotted at 1.5 or at 2. You have to be consistent. If we hire the next worker, they're going to produce 3 goods. It can be graphed at labor of 2.5 or 3, and just continuing 2 more, 1 more at 3.5 and 4.5 respectively. So that's the marginal product of labor. To find the value of the marginal product, which is the same as the marginal revenue product, which means how much additional money is the firm going to take in? Well, we know the $3 was the price, so we just multiply this column by 3. So 5 times 3, of course, is 15. We have 12. We have 9. We have 6. And we have 3. So these numbers are the corresponding marginal revenue product values. It's a dollar amount. If you hire that additional worker, the first worker, the company is bringing in $15. The second worker, they're bringing in $12, etc. So now, if we use this information to construct a graph, what would we get? So we're going to have the quantity of labor on the, I'm going to take the first column and the last column. I'm going to take the quantity of labor on the x-axis, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to put the price, a dollar amount, in this case the marginal revenue product, 15, 12, 9, 6, and 3. On the y-axis, if I graph those, I'm going to do it at the midpoint though, so that 0 to 1, that 0.5 is going to go to 15, 1.5 goes to 12, 2.5 goes to 9, 3.5 goes to 6, 4.5 goes to 3. So the question is, what does this curve look like? Well, we could call it the marginal revenue product. But it seems as though this would also be a good way to represent the demand for labor. How are businesses going to decide how much they're willing to pay? Right, this is the maximum price. Think demand we did before in the product market. It's the maximum price consumers are willing to pay. So demand for labor, you think, what is the maximum price firms want to pay for a worker? Well, if the first worker can bring in $15 more, it seems to make sense that that is the maximum price they're going to pay. So the marginal revenue product is the same for the demand for labor. So we just mentioned the demand for labor curve in the market is the same as the marginal revenue product. We know if the wage rate falls, businesses are happy, and the firms therefore are going to hire more workers. So this is the rule. From the product market, which we've done many, many times, all the different competitions, when do you maximize profit? You maximize profit when you set MR equals MC. So we need a similar rule here. When is a firm going to, up to what point is a firm going to hire workers? Well, it's going to simply be when the wage rate that they're paying equals the marginal revenue product. So the value of the marginal product, not the marginal product, the value of the marginal product is the same as the marginal revenue product, which is the selling price times the marginal product of labor. So think of it. If for some worker, if the value of marginal product that worker brings in is more than the wage rate. So if that additional work you hire can produce the value of, let's say, $30 worth of goods and services that could be sold. If the wage rate is $10.50, I'm just using that because I see that's the example the book used in the graph. If the worker can produce $30 worth of goods and services and the firm only has to pay them $10.50, then is this a good decision? Sure. The firm would want to hire more workers. If we flip on the other side, if the wage rate is $10.50 and a worker produces very little at a low selling price, let's say they only bring in, maybe they produce one good in that time period at $3, they only bring in $3. Well, if you're paying them $10.50 and they only bring in $3 to the firm, you would not want to hire that worker. You'd actually want to hire less workers. You actually want to fire workers if you already hire those. So you want to hire up until the point where the wage rate equals the marginal revenue product. So if we look here, so the demand for labor, I usually call it D subscript L, same as the marginal revenue product. This is for the firm, right? There's a side-by-side graph. The mark would be to the left. The firm, the price of labor of $10.50 is set by the interaction of the demanders and suppliers of labor in the market. But here, the worker is a wage taker, right? So that $10.50 wage rate, the worker, the suppliers of labor, are the wage taker. So if we look here, if we say when does the wage rate equal the marginal revenue product, it's just when the supply for labor and demand for labor cross. So you can see at a quantity of 2, the wage rate is $10.50, the firm would want to hire up through the second worker. So for that first worker, the first worker is bringing in, let's say, around $15. The firm is only paying them $10.50. That's a good decision. So yes, we want to hire that worker. If we go to, let's say, the fourth worker, the firm is paying them $10.50, but that worker is only bringing in maybe $5 more. Therefore, it's a bad decision. We wouldn't want to hire the fourth worker. For the similar reason, we don't want to hire the third worker. We hire all workers up through the second worker. So back to this at the top of this page. If the wage rate is $10.50 an hour, the owner would want to keep hiring additional workers up until the second worker was hired, but he would incur a loss if the third worker or any worker after the third worker was hired in this case. And just to read this to review. A little bit of a side. The AP seems to go back and forth more in the past. I think they did it more correctly. There's something called the marginal factor costs. When a business hires workers, they not only pay the salary, there are other costs associated with that. First, cost of materials to make goods. So even though the rule is that they use is you set the wage rate equal to the marginal revenue product, and that's what seems to be used now, but the better rule really is the marginal factor cost. This is not only just the cost of the salary, the wage rate, the cost of material and the other things that are required to produce that extra good. So normally you would say you set the marginal factor cost equal to the marginal revenue product, but maybe for simplicity, the AP seems just to be doing the wage rate as most of the intro econ books are doing. So you may see a marginal factor cost in an older AP question. So hopefully that makes sense. You can ask me if you're unsure. You should work on this problem. Practice problem, so the answers are in the book. The key things to look out for as soon as I see, or hopefully you see, perfectly competitive, we should think that the worker is a wage taker. But you should construct a table previous example that has the marginal product of labor. Right, so you want the marginal product of labor column, you want the marginal revenue product to compute, and it looks like you're given the wage rate, and you should be able to figure this out from there. Also work out this problem, which is from 2006 AP. Same thing, buzzwords, perfectly competitive, wage rate. You should be able to do that as well. You can look online, or after the notes I have it as well, the answers to this problem. And I am going to stop this section right now, 18.3, and I will continue the video.